Have you ever had this happen at work where you spot a problem and because of your expertise, you know exactly what needs to happen? You know the next steps, you know it's clear in your mind, but then you explain it to your boss and their response shows that they ain't taking you seriously. Meanwhile, you're there thinking, did you hear what I just said? Because in your mind, the solution to the problem is so obvious, it's like a no brainer. The consequences are obvious, the solution is obvious, like everything is just laid out in your mind crystal clear. So you're wondering like, why aren't you doing anything? Because I'm pretty sure that this was clear. Well, here's what I want to suggest. Not that your boss is necessarily ignoring you, but they might be ignoring your framing. And those are two different things. And if you get them mixed up, you're probably going to get offended. What I want to explain is from an auditory perspective, we are constantly filtering what it is that we take in. And we do this through a little part of your auditory system, which is called the reticular activating system. And its job is essentially to decide what should I pay attention to and what can I safely ignore? Because let's face it, we hear and see and sense too many things to pay attention to everything. If we paid attention to everything, we'd pay attention to nothing. And therefore, we need to filter. And even the process of filtering is too tiring for us. So the brain needs to do it on our behalf. And so one of the biggest criteria it then uses is relevance. That's filtering through the question like, does this apply to me? And should I be caring about it? Your auditory brain is doing that on a constant basis in order for you not to miss out on the things that really matter. And I say this because I think this is where a lot of technical professionals run into trouble because they explain problems on terms that they understand, not on the terms that their boss cares about. So if you're thinking like cybersecurity, obviously there's serious vulnerabilities and risks. And so if you walk into a meeting and you say, hey, listen, we've identified a vulnerability in the authentication layer, which could potentially cause weaknesses in our infrastructure. Of course, all of this is technically correct. But what does your CEO hear? Maybe he just hears, oh, technical words, technical problem. But if you speak in terms of his relevance or her relevance, you're going to address it talking about you risk losing everything we have been building for the last 10 years if you do not take this step. The framing is completely different. One is relevance to you, the other is relevance to them. And relevance is what captures our attention. This is where many experts are getting stuck. Because if you assume that people just understand facts and that they'll automatically care, then you're going to talk and you're going to get a rude awakening because that's not how people work. We care first. We give our attention to what we care about. Then we bring in the understanding. If you think people are automatically going to care just because you give them information, well, actually, you will probably already know that's not true. You can be pretty sure, unless the person in front of you is technical themselves and cares about the technical detail, they're not listening for technical detail. They're listening for implications and consequences, and they're wanting to make decisions quickly. And if you make that job harder for them, then you're more likely to be overlooked. So what I want to suggest that is that before your next meeting, ask yourself, what is my boss here for? What is it that they care about? Now, what do I care about? What do they care about? And then if you explain your recommendation in terms of that lens, instead of explaining the mechanics, instead of explaining all the backstory, just explain the impact for them. Instead of explaining the process, just explain the outcome for them. Instead of explaining the problem at length, just explain why it matters. Because the goal of communication is not to transfer information, it's to create, understand, communication combined, right? It's the understanding that creates that relevance. So the takeaway here is this: the next time you explain something and you find your boss isn't acting on your idea, don't assume that they disagree, but ask yourself, am I explaining the problem on their terms or on mine? And if you increase the relevance, you increase attention. And when you increase attention, you also increase your influence, my friend. So don't explain the problem on your own terms. explain it on theirs. That's the big takeaway.